The smell hit me first. Something cold and antiseptic, like a hospital that had been abandoned for years. My wrists were sore where the zip ties had cut in, and the chair beneath me was metal, the kind that makes your back ache after 20 minutes. I didn't know where I was. I didn't even know what country I was in anymore. What I did know was that the man standing across from me, the one they called the buyer, had stopped mid-sentence the moment his eyes landed on the ring on my right hand. He went completely still. And then, very quietly, he asked, "Where did you get that?" I need to go back. I need to start from the beginning because none of this will make sense otherwise. And I've spent the last 3 years trying to make sense of it myself. My name is Nora. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in Oakville, Ontario, and until about 14 months ago, I thought the most complicated thing in my life was figuring out how to tell my boyfriend I didn't want to move to Calgary with him. That feels like a different lifetime now. I was the kind of person who trusted too easily. That's the honest truth of it. My therapist has said as much, more than once, in that careful way therapists have of telling you something painful while making it sound like neutral information. I grew up being told that family is everything, that you don't air your grievances publicly, that you protect the people you love no matter what it costs you. My grandmother drilled that into all of us from the time we were small. We're Halorans. We hold together. My grandmother passed when I was 26. My mother and her sister had a falling out about the estate, a small house in Burlington that wasn't worth much but apparently meant everything. And by the time the lawyers were done, I had an aunt who no longer returned my calls, and a mother who cried every time someone mentioned Grandma Halloran's name, my mother. I have to talk about her carefully, even now, because part of me still loves her. I think I always will. But love doesn't make someone safe. That's the thing I didn't understand until it was almost too late. Her name is Sylvette. She was a registered nurse for 22 years. Well-respected, competent, the kind of woman who volunteers for the difficult shifts because she can handle pressure. She raised me mostly on her own after my father left when I was 9. We weren't rich, but we were stable. She made sure I went to university. She came to my convocation and cried, and I remember thinking she looked so proud and so tired at the same time, and I wanted to be worthy of that. I didn't know then what she had been doing to stay stable. I didn't know the debts. I didn't know the men she owed money to. I didn't know any of it. My boyfriend. I'll call him my boyfriend because that's what he was, even if the word feels filthy in my mouth now. His name was Carver. We'd been together for 2 years. He was handsome in a way that made you feel lucky, which I now understand is a warning sign rather than a feature. He worked in logistics, he said, international freight. He traveled a lot. He always had explanations. He came into my life the same month my mother's debt started catching up to her. I know that now. I didn't know it then. The timing felt like a coincidence. The timing was not a coincidence. He was charming. He brought me coffee exactly the way I like it. Oat milk, 1 sugar, from the good place on Lakeshore, and he remembered things I mentioned in passing. The name of my high school best friend, the novel I'd been trying to finish for 3 years, the anniversary of my grandmother's death. He was attentive the way people are attentive when they're performing attentiveness rather than actually feeling it. I couldn't tell the difference. I didn't want to. 6 months in, he suggested a trip. Barcelona, he said. He had connections there through work. We could stay somewhere beautiful. I'd never been to Europe. That was true, I'd always wanted to go. And I said yes without thinking twice. I packed for 10 days. I hugged my mother at the airport. She held on a little longer than usual, and I remember thinking she seemed upset about something. Preoccupied, distant. I asked if she was okay. She said she was just going to miss me. She kissed my cheek and let go. I didn't know that was the last time I would see her as someone I trusted. The first 3 days in Barcelona were genuinely lovely. I want to be clear about that because otherwise this story sounds like something from a crime podcast, and I sound like an idiot who walked into the obvious trap. It wasn't obvious. The apartment was beautiful. High ceilings, a view of the Eixample neighborhood, a little balcony where we drank wine in the evenings. Carver was relaxed and funny and present in a way he sometimes wasn't at home. I was happy. I was genuinely, completely happy. On the 4th day, he said he needed to step out for a work meeting. He'd be back by dinner. He kissed me on the forehead and left. He didn't come back by dinner. He didn't come back at all. Instead, at around 9 o'clock that night, 2 men knocked on the apartment door. They were polite. One of them spoke very good English with a slight Catalan accent. He told me that there had been a change of plans and that I needed to come with them. He held up his phone and showed me a photo of Carver. Carver on a street somewhere, looking scared, with someone's hand on his collar. He owes people money, the man said. You're how it gets paid back. I've tried to describe what that moment feels like, what it actually physically feels like, and I don't think I can do it justice. Your body understands something before your mind catches up. My legs went cold. I couldn't form a clear thought. The part of me that was a capable adult woman with a master's degree and a good job and a sensible RRSP account just disappeared. What was left was something much more animal than that. Something that understood danger at a cellular level and had absolutely no idea what to do about it. I tried to run. I want you to know that. I didn't just go quietly. I made it as far as the hallway before the second man caught me. He wasn't violent, not in a way that left marks, but he was absolute. His grip said, "This is not a negotiation." They put me in a car. I was driven for what felt like 40 minutes, maybe more. I had no phone. I'd left my passport in the apartment. I watched the city lights thin out and tried to memorize landmarks that all looked the same in the dark. We arrived at what I can only describe as an estate. High walls, electronic gates, gravel driveway, the kind of house that announces its own importance. I was brought inside and put in a room that was almost comfortable. A bed, a private bathroom, a window with frosted glass so I could tell it was daylight, but couldn't see anything specific. Clean towels, like a hotel that didn't want you to leave. I stayed in that room for 2 days. Someone brought food. No one explained anything. I alternated between panic and a strange flat calm that I now know is what shock looks like from the inside. I tried the door every hour. It was always locked. On the third day, I was brought downstairs. The man waiting for me in what I can only call a receiving room was nothing like what I expected. He was older, late 50s, I'd guess, and he was immaculately dressed in the way of someone who has been wealthy for long enough that it no longer requires effort. He had reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a cup of tea on the table beside him, and he was looking at a document when I walked in. He looked up. He introduced himself as the person who had purchased my debt. "Not me," he said, with a kind of careful precision. "The debt." He was at pains to make that distinction, which I found almost funny in its obscenity. As if the framing made a difference. I was standing a few feet away from him, and I was wearing the same clothes I'd been wearing for 3 days, and I was not going to cry in front of this man. I had made that decision somewhere around hour 2 of day 1, and I was holding to it. He was looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not cruel, which scared me more than cruelty would have. Something more complicated. Something that looked impossibly like recognition. "That ring," he said. He stood up from his chair, slowly, the way men of a certain age move when they're being deliberate rather than cautious. He crossed the room and stopped about 2 feet away from me and looked at the ring on my right hand. It was my grandmother's ring. A thin silver band with a small oval garnet. Nothing valuable by any financial measure, just a piece she'd worn every day of her adult life and left to me because I was the one who'd sat with her in the hospital at the end. I'd worn it so long I'd stopped seeing it. "I need to ask you something," he said. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the ring. "What is your grandmother's name?" The question made no sense. I told him so. "Please," he said. And something in his voice had changed. The professional distance had cracked just slightly. Enough that I could see something raw underneath it. "What is her name?" "Halloran," I said. "Eleanor Halloran. She passed 5 years ago." He sat down on the edge of a chair that wasn't his chair. He sat the way people sit when their knees have stopped cooperating. "Eleanor," he said, very quietly, almost to himself. I watched a man I had every reason to fear fold up like a piece of paper. He was quiet for what must have been 2 full minutes. I didn't move. I didn't know what was happening. I only knew that whatever was happening was not what I had been brought here for. Finally, he looked up and said, "I knew your grandmother. A very long time ago, in Halifax. Before she married your grandfather." He paused. "I was in love with her." I stared at him. "She gave me this ring," he said. "One like it. She said she had 2. Her mother gave her a pair and she was going to give one to the man she was going to marry." I thought. He stopped. I was very young. We both were. She chose differently. I don't have the vocabulary for what I felt in that moment. Grief and strangeness and something almost like vertigo. My grandmother, sensible, sturdy Eleanor Halloran, who made her own bread and watched Jeopardy every evening and smelled of lavender and practical soap, had a whole life I'd never known about. Had loved someone I was now standing in front of in a house I'd been brought to against my will, in a country I'd arrived in on false pretenses. Who organized this? He asked. His voice quieter and harder at the same time. Who arranged for you specifically to come here? I told him everything I knew. About Carver, about the men at the door, about my mother's face at the airport, that long goodbye that had felt like something more than a goodbye. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was very still. Your mother, he said, owes money to the same people I work with. Did you know that? I didn't. He told me then, carefully, not unkindly, that my mother had been in debt to a financial network for nearly 4 years. Not just personal debt, she had been peripherally involved in arranging transactions for this network, in exchange for the forgiveness of a portion of what she owed. Carver had been one of their people. Our entire relationship had been orchestrated, and when the debt became unmanageable, she had, not in so many words, not in writing. She had pointed them toward me. I sat down on the floor. I know that's an odd thing to do. There was a perfectly good chair nearby, but my body made a decision independent of my brain, and the floor was where I ended up, with my back against the wall and my grandmother's ring on my hand, in a country I'd never been to, processing the fact that my mother had handed me to strangers to settle her accounts. He came and crouched down in front of me, at eye level, without condescension. I'm going to get you home, he said. I want you to understand that. What happened today, what I was told you were, that is not something I will participate in. It never wired your part this? I asked him. My voice was steadier than I expected. He was quiet for a moment. That, he said, is a fair question, and a long answer. But not one for today. His name was Gordon. He told me that much. He didn't tell me his last name, and I didn't ask. He made 2 phone calls while I sat on the floor, speaking in rapid Catalan that I couldn't follow. Then he helped me stand up, in the solicitous way of someone unused to helping people stand up, and he sent someone to retrieve my passport from the apartment. He arranged a flight, business class, which under any other circumstances would have been a thrill. I sat in that wide seat and watched the coast of Spain disappear below the clouds and felt nothing at all. Just a roaring blankness that I later learned is what your nervous system does when it has processed more than it can hold. I landed in Toronto at 6 in the morning. It was October, and the air smelled like wet leaves and cold and home, and I stood at the arrivals gate for a long time before I could make myself move. I didn't go home to my mother's house. I went to my friend's apartment. I'll call her my friend because that's exactly what she is, the most exact definition of the word. And I sat in her kitchen at 7 in the morning and told her everything while she made me tea and didn't say anything unhelpful. She's a social worker. She knew better than to try to fix it before I'd finished telling it. When I was done, she asked, "What do you want to do?" That was the right question, not what I should do, not what made sense. What did I want? I didn't answer immediately. I sat with the tea cooling between my hands and I thought about my mother at the airport, holding on a little too long. I thought about whether she had known exactly and fully what she was handing me to. I thought about whether there was a version of events where she told herself it was something else, something less than what it was. The way people do when they need to survive their own choices. I thought about my grandmother who had loved a young man in Halifax and given him a ring and then married someone else and never mentioned it, and had raised a daughter who turned out to be capable of this. I thought about how love and safety are not the same thing, and how long it takes to really understand the difference. I went to the police 3 days later. I want to be honest. It was not the cathartic, righteous experience I might have wanted it to be. It was bureaucratic and slow, and the officer I first spoke to me with an expression I can only describe as politely skeptical. International jurisdiction. Lack of physical evidence. The logistical complexity of what I was describing. He took notes. He was not unkind. He told me these things take time. What I didn't tell the police, not initially, was Gordon. I wasn't sure what to do with Gordon. He had done something wrong, and then undone it, and I couldn't calculate the moral weight of that with any precision. I still can't, entirely. What I can tell you is that 3 weeks after I got home, I received a letter, an actual paper letter, which I hadn't gotten since my grandmother used to send me birthday cards. It had a Barcelona postmark and no return address. Inside was a single handwritten page. It said that certain debts had been cleared, that certain arrangements had been unwound, that a person whose involvement had been instrumental in recent events had been made aware that further involvement would have consequences. The language was formal and slightly old-fashioned, and it didn't say my mother's name, but it didn't have to. At the bottom, in the same careful handwriting, Eleanor's granddaughter deserves better than any of this. I'm sorry, took meeting you to understand what I'd agreed to be part of. G. I've kept the letter. It's in the drawer beside my bed, next to my grandmother's ring. I took it off my hand when I got home, and I haven't put it back. Not because I don't want to, but because I need to decide what it means to me now. Whether it still means the same things. Whether that's even the right question. My mother and I have not spoken directly since I got back. There was a conversation once, mediated through a third party, a cousin I've always trusted, where she said things that I know were meant as an apology without being able to fully become one. She is not, I've come to understand, a person who can look directly at the worst thing she has done. Maybe most people can't. Maybe the capacity to really see yourself clearly is rarer than we like to think. I don't know if I'll forgive her. I notice that I want to, which is maybe the closest I can honestly get right now. Carver, I don't think about if I can help it. There is nothing in me that resembles forgiveness where he is concerned, and I've decided that's okay. Some things don't need to be forgiven. Some things just need to be survived and then set down. What I think about most, actually, is Gordon crouching on the floor in front of me in that house in Barcelona, at eye level, no distance between us, telling me he was going to get me home. The incongruous, impossible decency of it. I think about my grandmother in Halifax, young and not yet the woman I knew, handing a ring to someone she loved and then making a different choice. What she must have carried. What she never said. I think about the ring in my drawer and whether I'll put it back on someday. I started seeing a therapist in November. She's good. She asks hard questions and doesn't accept vague answers. And she once told me, in that careful, neutral way, that rebuilding trust doesn't mean believing everyone. It means learning to read the difference again, slowly, without being so afraid of being wrong that you can't read anything at all. I'm working on that. Some days it goes better than others. What I know for certain is this. I am not the woman who walked through that airport in September, relieved and trusting and utterly unaware. I don't think I get to go back to her, and on most days I'm not sure I'd want to. She was happy, but she was also walking toward a departure gate that her own mother had helped design. I'm someone else now. Someone who checks the exits. Someone who knows that the people who say hold together the loudest are sometimes the ones pulling at the seams. Someone who kept the letter. Someone who eventually will decide what to do with the ring.